Hi, my name is Lydia, and I'm currently a third-year PhD student in the Psychological Sciences Department at Rice University. I'm part of the Health Psychology and Behavioral Medicine Research Interest Group, as well as the Cognitive and Affective Neuroscience Research Interest Group. So today I'm going to talk about two things. The first is how I ended up deciding to become a PhD student in the area that I'm in. And second, my research interests, the research questions I like to ask, and a little bit about what I do on a daily basis. So how did I get here? So if you're watching this video, I'm thinking that perhaps you are a little bit interested in wanting to go to grad school. And so hopefully this will be encouraging to some of you who are still thinking about whether you should pursue a PhD in psychology. And so first, what led me here were a couple of things. I would say the things that I did in high school, the habits that I developed in high school, the interests that I developed in college, as well as the experiences that I had after college definitely shaped the type of research I do now, as well as how I survive in grad school. And so those are sort of the things that I hope to talk about briefly in the next few minutes. And so when I was in high school, I really loved just learning. This actually was probably even before high school. I loved learning new things, and I knew going into college that I wanted to major in biology. And so when I went to Wheaton College up in Chicago, it's a small Christian liberal arts school. I started off as a biology major, but eventually added on another major in psychology, and found that I really loved microbiology and immunology, abnormal psychology, as well as behavioral neuroscience and infectious disease. And because of that, that led me to also volunteer in a number of research labs, and I definitely think that my experience with a variety of different types of research labs eventually led me to where I am now. So I started off in a cell biology research lab at UT Austin for the summer, and spent a majority of my time trying to isolate a protein, and found that I didn't really enjoy it that much. And so then I moved to animal research, looking at mice and rats, and I did this for 3 years, and I actually really enjoyed doing this. Basically what we did was we would put these rats into a behavioral paradigm, and then afterwards we would sacrifice them and extract their brains, and then stain those brain slices and look in a microscope to identify certain cells that we were interested in looking at. And after graduating college, I was actually thinking about, committing my life to doing animal research in this area called behavioral neuroscience. But I wanted to double check that this was what I wanted to do. And so I also volunteered and ended up working in a human research lab studying psychoneuroimmunology, which I will explain what it is later. But what I found was that I really loved interacting with human participants, and eventually decided that I would actually rather do research with human participants. And so I made that shift from animal research to human research, which is what I do now. Some things that I think were part of the most impactful things that actually helped me as a grad student that are non-academic are what I did before I went to college, and also what I did after I went to college. So before I went to college, I participated in a lot of extracurriculars, mainly sports, and I think my engagement with sports all through 12th grade really just shaped my work ethic as well as my time management skills. And I think the things that you learn on the court when you're conditioning and it's like you're losing a game and that you need to push through, I think that mentality has really stuck through all the way till now as a grad student. I'm sure it's going to stick through as I move to future career things. And so that's one important thing. And the last thing that I did after college was, I took 2 gap years and I did research, but at the same time I also worked at a mental health residential treatment center as a supervisor. And there I worked closely with each client who was there because they had a severe mental illness, and they had struggled with it, many for like their whole life. And by the time they reached us, they had been to like 5 other treatment programs. And so from that experience, I was able to see firsthand what it was like to have a mental illness for a majority of your life and what it does to you. And I think it really informs the kind of research questions I ask now, because you learn about these in textbooks and you also learn about it from your professors, but to know what it's like, or to kind of see with your own eyes what it looks like, I think it definitely changes the type of, it humanizes the person. I think it reminds me why I do the research that I do. So that's all I have for how I became a PhD student. There are definitely more details, and if you want to know more, definitely reach out. I'll put my contact information at the end of this whole video. In a very simply said way, I study the mind-body connection. Now, to be a little bit more specific, I studied the bidirectional connections between psychological processes and biological processes. Now, that might sound like a hefty sentence, but actually that's actually really broad, but I'll break it down for you. So psychological processes are basically the processes that we as humans use when we experience, when we feel, when we think, or like when we engage in human behavior, because psychology is the study of human behavior, thoughts, and feelings. And I study how these experiences as humans, what we feel, what we think, how we behave, also impacts our biology. So it impacts our biological systems, like your immune system, which is what is involved in fighting off disease or healing your body after an injury. It also impacts your brain, which probably may be the most intuitive, because the brain is involved with every aspect of your body. And the brain is also, of course, involved in like how we think. And I study the interaction between these psychological processes and biological processes in the context of how they can either lead to disease or worsen the progression of a disease. So some of the things I like to focus on, or I guess some of the mental and physical illnesses I like to focus on, are depression and dementia. So how does the experience of stress lead to the development of depression or lead to the development of dementia, are some of the questions that I currently and have in the past sought to answer, and I still currently seek to answer, because depression and dementia are still things that we've researched for such a long period of time, but our knowledge of how they've come to be is still very unclear. And it's also because dementia is actually a broad term for all these neurodegenerative disorders, and so there's obviously a lot of heterogeneity in them, as well as depression being a heterogeneous disorder that has a ton of different symptoms that are very different, and two people could have very different symptoms and yet be diagnosed with depression. So there's a lot of complexity in those disorders, and so I try to understand a little bit more of like what causes those diseases, as well as who may be more at risk for developing those types of diseases. So that's what I study, and so I wanted to end with just a kind of a snapshot of what I do on a daily basis as a grad student. So as a grad student, I take classes. Hopefully I won't have to take classes for very long. So I take classes, but I also do research. I run research visits. The things that we study, we have our participants come in and we draw blood, because to study the immune system, you have a lot of immune cells in your kind of circulating in your blood, and so when you draw blood, you can kind of get an idea of the integrity of your immune system. I also, in these research visits, we sometimes might scan people's brains. We study the brain, and so sometimes we want to know like the connectivity of various areas of your brain, or we might want to know how your brain responds when you are doing a certain task in the scanner. So that's also another thing. And then of course we get self-report questionnaires to get an idea of how that person is feeling, or how that person has been sleeping, if they have been feeling depressed in the past few days, all sorts of questions like that. So that's just a very brief summary of what may happen at a research visit. And so aside from running research visits, I also, analyze data, because once you collect that data, you want to analyze it. Then we write a paper, publish it, and then hopefully present it at conferences, or even share it with, the lay public, and hopefully be able to translate this research to, people who need it, and communicate it in a way that is understandable to both the scientific community and also the non-scientific community. So that's a little bit about myself and my journey, as well as the work I currently do. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me in the contact information, hopefully to the side. And definitely would love to talk about if any questions you have about getting into grad school or figuring out what kind of research you want to do, as well as, if you're interested in some of the research topics I mentioned, would love to talk about that too. Anyways, thanks for listening, and hope you guys are staying safe during this time.